Next, let's create the last functions that we need. It's 3 of them. It's the get book by ID, and update a book, and delete a book. Let's just start with the ID one, the one where we get the book by ID, and we'll just copy the function from above and call this one get book by ID. And of course, this one needs to take in a parameter that will be a number. And then I don't want it to return an array of books. I just want it to return a single book. And then down here, we can use this select query statement again, but we just need to add where ID equals, and then we can do a $sign and a 1. And this allows us to put in a placeholder with a value that we specify over here, which will of course be the ID. And then down here, instead of returning all the rows, we will just return that single row that there is, because there will only be one with this ID. So we can just return index 0, because rows will be an array of books, but there will only be one element in the array. So we just return that one element. So instead of returning the array, we just return that one element. Good. And then let's of course use this function over in our server. So at this endpoint where we get the books by ID, instead of using this in-memory database or array, we will instead use the DB service, and we'll get the book by ID, and we will then specify the ID. But of course we have to typecast this as a number, because currently it will just be a string like this. And since this will be asynchronous, we need to await this and specify async up here. All right, this should now give us back our new book. So if we open up our browser, for example, where we can see our current books, and we can see that we have 1, 2, 3. Let's try to query the second index or the second ID. Remember, now it's not according to indexes. Now it's actually according to the correct ID of the book. But if we try to get the book with ID 2, let's see if we get something. And we send the request, and we actually get back book with ID 2. So that seems to be working. Next, let's do the function for updating a book. And this one is a little bit tricky, because I would like to be able to allow the user to only specify the values that they want to update. So if they only want to update the title, then they only supply the title, and then they don't have to provide all the other values. And this means that we dynamically have to create a query string based on the values that we get. We cannot just put all of the values of the book into the query string. And I invite you to try to create this function by yourself. I know it can be very, very difficult, but it's a very good challenge. And it will be very rewarding for you if you manage to do this. But nonetheless, if you just want to see it, that's also fine. I will grab the function from somewhere else and paste it in, so you don't have to watch me type it out, but then I will explain it afterwards. So give this a try if you want, otherwise just keep watching. So I will paste in this function and explain it. It's called update book by ID. It of course takes an ID as a parameter, and then it takes an updates object. And these objects is of the type book update. And let's just have a look at how this one works. I have created it here above next to the book type, and it is actually very similar to the book, except that all of the values can now also be undefined. So the title can be undefined, author can be undefined, and publish can be undefined. And in this way, we can allow the client or the user to provide this object, but only with the values that they actually want to change. And the rest they can just omit and don't include. So if we jump back to the code, back to this function, the way it works is that we want to create an SQL query string that only includes the variables that actually have a value. So if the title has a value, then we add the title to the query string. If the author has a value, then we add the author. But if they don't, we don't add them. And this can be a little bit tricky to do, but this is how I ended up doing it. There's probably a lot of different ways to do it, but I found that this was a nice way to do it. It took me some time to figure this out. So as I said, it's a little bit tricky, but the way I do it is that first I want to find the keys that actually have a value. So I want to get all of those keys where they are not undefined as the value. And the way I do it is that I first grab all the keys, and then I filter on that array of all the keys. So now I have title, author, and published. And next I want to filter, and I only want the key where when I use that key on the update, I actually get a value. So this is what I do over here. I grab the updates and then I index it, or I grab the property that matches the key. And if that is not undefined, then I want it to go through my filter and then I want to include it. And this tricky thing in here is just a TypeScript technicality. It's because we need to tell TypeScript that the key that we're getting from over here, that it is a key of this book update type, because TypeScript cannot know this because we are doing this dynamically. Look, we don't have a string here that says author, and we don't literally specify a string called title, for example. Instead, we're dynamically using this key as a variable. And in order to do this, we have to say explicitly that this key will be a correct key on the book update. And we know that it is going to be because we got this key from the keys of the book update. So it's totally fine. But this is a technicality, and this is how you can actually use a dynamic key to index your object by specifying as key of and then that type, the type of the object. And this means that now we have a list in here in the keys. We have a list of the keys that actually have a corresponding value. So next, we're going to need some commas in our SQL statement, because after each of the value that we want to update, there needs to be a comma. And this is because if we just take a look at this, for example, this is how it's going to be. In the end, we want this kind of query string where we say we want to update the book table, and we want to set the title equal to some value, and then a comma if there's one more thing, and then the author equal to a value, and a comma if there's another value, and after the last one we don't want any more commas. But imagine if there was only one of these were present. If we only had the title to update, then we shouldn't put a comma. So we have to also be clever about how we put in the commas. And the way that I try to solve this is by making a variable called commas needed that specifies how many commas we need. And this will be the amount of keys that we have minus 1. Because if we have 3 keys, then we're going to need 2 commas. 2 keys, we're going to need 1 comma. So this will be the amount of commas that we need. And then I simply loop or iterate through all of these keys. And for each of the keys, I add something to the query string. And the thing I add is a white space, then the key, which will either be title, author, or published in the current iteration. I set this equal to, and then a single quote, and then I grab the value from object updates by using the key. And this is exactly the same as above. I use the key as a key of this type, and this allows me to then grab the value that is in updates, and then I have a finishing quote. Single quote. And then I check if I need any more commas. And if I do need a comma, if I need more than 0 commas, then I also add a comma. And then I subtract from the commas needed how many. I just subtract 1 because now I need 1 less comma. So I do this for each of the keys. And in this way, I would create a query string that only includes the keys and values that are not undefined. And then in the end, of course, I need to add a white space and then specify that this is only going to be applied where the ID equals the ID. And finally, I'll just console log my query so that I can look in the log and just have a check while we are developing that this query string is actually correct. And finally, I use the pool to make this query, and then I grab this updated book by using the getBookById that we just defined previously, and then I return this book. And this, I would say, has to be an await, because we need to wait for this. And then we return this updated book. So let's give this a try over in the server file in the API. And if we find our endpoint here for the update, and instead of updating the in-memory array, we instead want to use the DB service. I'll just rename this variable to be called updates. I think that's a little bit better. And then let's use the DB service. So we can await DB service dot update book by ID. We specify the ID. This has to be a number. So let's just typecast it. And we specify the updates. Of course, in order to await this, we need to make this one async, and this should then also return, we also return the updated book. So let's put that in a variable called updated book. And that is why I changed the name of the variable above, because this one is more saying for what it is. And let's just return the updated book in the end, like this. Let's have a look and see if it works. I'll jump over to Postman. First, I'll just get all my books to see what I have in my database. I have 3 books. I have one with ID 1, so let's try that one out. And I go over to the put, and let's update ID 1 and press send. And we get a status 200, and we can see that ID 1 now is the one with title, a newly updated book, and the author that changed opinion, and so on. So we have successfully changed all of these values. But what if we only want to change, let's say we just want to change this published value. Let's see if it works. We remove the other 2, and published we just set to false. And let's have a look. And we get back the same values, but the published has changed. So this is actually working just as intended. And that is nice. And if we take a look in the over here in the console, because we put these console.log statements about the query, we will now see that this is the query statement that we created both times, and they look fine. So that is really nice, and is working as we expected. Finally, we just need to add the delete function. So let's create that one, and we can just copy this one again, and I will just delete all of this, but we need to change this to be delete book by ID, and now we don't need to specify anything other than the ID, and our promise will just return a void, because we don't have anything to actually return here. So after in order to do this, we of course need a query, and I will just copy this from another function just for it to be a little bit faster and make this video shorter. So this is what we want to do. We want to query, and we want to delete from the book table where ID is equal to this value. So some very simple stuff, and then finally we just return. And actually we don't even need this result. We can make this more simple. We can just do like this, and we could make it even more simple. We could just return like this, or maybe not, like this. Good. So now we are deleting a book, and if we grab if we go to the API and actually use this function, let's give that a try. So over here in the delete endpoint, instead of splicing and doing all this stuff, we'll instead use the DB service to delete a book. And again, we have to specify this as a number, and I would like to await for this. And then I will not return anything in this JSON, but I can just do a send and send a message saying that the book was deleted, if this goes well. And we need to specify that this is asynchronous, like this. And this also means that now we can actually remove this books array because we no longer need it. We are now fully dependent and fully using our database, our real database. That is really nice. So now we have an endpoint to delete a book. Let's check it out, see if it works. If we jump over to Postman and we get all our books, let's have a look. We have 3 books currently, and let's try to delete the one with ID 3. So we jump over to our delete endpoint and try to delete book with book 3, and we get a successful OK status, and we have this message saying that the book was deleted. If we try to get all the books again, we should now only get 2 books, and we only get 2 of them. So that is working perfectly. All right, that was actually it for creating a database connection and using it to manage all our endpoints and to supply our endpoints with real data and have it consistent. So now you have successfully moved from this in-memory array of books to a real database. So that is really, really cool and some good stuff. And I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. And then I'll just see you in the next level. Happy coding.